Jacques, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to the session. So we're just going to allow for the last few attendees to join today. We're really excited about today's session, focusing on how we can use AI for public affairs consultants. And this is going to be a really interesting session on some examples, some techniques, some tools, some ideas to inspire you on different ways to use AI in public affairs. So just a few minutes before we get started.
Don't scare anyone, Jacques. It's not a few minutes, few seconds, I'd say.
Few seconds, yes.
Yeah, that's right. So warm welcome from everyone. Those of you who are here, why don't you type into the chat box where you're dialing in from? I guess many of you are in Brussels, perhaps some from overseas or from other parts of Europe. You're very welcome here because we try to make this kind of geography agnostic and not to focus too much on Brussels and the European Union, but also make it applicable for Washington, D.C. Or Singapore or any other part of the world. But again, many of you would likely be closer to the old continent. But that's excellent. So let's get actually started if you are all ready, which I hope you are. And maybe a few words on what we do at Influence Builders, because we help global teams master the skills of tomorrow. And the skills of tomorrow rely heavily on artificial intelligence and its practical daily hands-on use. So we've run workshops all across Europe. Also, Jacques was in Washington, D.C. a couple of months ago, and we've had also webinars and other presentations all the way to Japan and other parts of the world, worked with EU institutions, European Commission, and trade associations and consultancies, and various large corporations as well. So, Jacques, maybe you want to say a few words about our series.
Sure. So we had a webinar series, the first one focusing more on communications. Today, this one is going to be focusing on how you can use AI as a public affairs consultant. And it's something that we continually do. We really appreciate and enjoy doing these free series. And we're going to continue doing this in the future. So feel free to share or to check our content on LinkedIn, but also on Substack. And we also have a website with more information about the next training opportunities.
Yeah, and you mentioned Substack. So it's AI for Influence. So that's our newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter that we publish, sometimes with the recording of these very webinars and sometimes with very hands-on tips and stuff that we've come across or things that we've discovered, always focusing on advocacy, public affairs, strategic communications, because there are a lot of newsletters, a lot of information out there about AI, but not with this kind of focus that we're trying to really zoom in on. And to get started with today's session, so we have 45 minutes, not even at this point. And the quick disclaimer is that the AI tools we show are certainly just illustrative only. And sometimes they are not as corroborated because we don't have obviously any internal or sensitive data that your organizations may have. And especially if you have an internal tool in your consultancy or your organization, like a Copilot or Gemini or any other, then you will have much better, much more sophisticated results because you overlay public data with the client data or sensitive data that you can all put into your internal trusted tool. And then you're welcome to ask any questions in the chat, and Jacques will be helpful in addressing those and reading those out. I might chip in as well. All the slides will be shared in the end, and it will be relatively fast because we want to cover a lot of ground. So if anything is a little quick for your taste, certainly you can watch it afterwards in the recording or check the slides, or you're welcome to get in touch with us. We'll be always happy to go into more depth. So first question, what do you use AI for? And certainly you use it for a lot of things, I would assume, but in your professional work, in your consultancy work, in your advisory work, what do you use AI for? And I rely on you, Jacques, to
Yes, to
read
check the
out
chat.
any question, to check the chat, exactly, because my screen share, I have limited access to that.
No worries. Yeah. And usually the use cases that people come up with is writing text, writing a first draft, researching information online, getting clarification on a specific topic, Sometimes it's simplifying, summarizing. So feel free to drop any other use case in the chat, and we'll be happy to address these as we go along.
Yeah, and just to say whether those questions come in now or perhaps they come a little later, is like you said, Jacques. Often the response to this in the consultancy world, in the advisory world, is maybe surfacing some messages or getting some background information from your Outlook emails if Copilot is plugged into your system, or perhaps doing some basic research on a particular policy issue for a client and finding out more where they stand. And again, these are great use cases and very straightforward. What we're hoping to do in the next couple dozen minutes is really expand your paradigm as to what you can do with AI in the particular job that you are in. So with that, let's actually look at a couple points. The main uses in public affairs, and the credit goes to Jacques for creating this beautiful alliteration and 3 C's, which is collect, create, and criticize. You want to say more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the collect, create, and criticize is a framework that I've been thinking about for a long time, and it's collecting information online, searching for specific information, and translating this into simple words. Usually, this is what public affairs consultants focus on. The creating part is all about everything I mentioned earlier: writing a first draft, developing strategy documents, developing position statements. Just having an idea of how your messaging might sound for a specific audience. And the last point, criticize, is actually my favorite, is reviewing your work and assessing how you can improve it, how you can make it more persuasive, and how you can identify some of the flaws in your writing or in your arguments to improve the overall delivery of your message.
And I think that's a helpful framework. And many of the things we'll share with you now fit into one box or another. Sometimes it's a mix between those. But that's a helpful way, because more often than not, the issue with AI is just it's so vast, it's so open, it's so versatile that you can use it for so many things that it's hard to know where to start and hard to come up with ideas of where it can be useful for you. And essentially it's shrinking the infinite choice and saying, okay, these are the things that we want to use AI for. And the first one we would look at is research and say, okay, what can you use AI for? Now, we are a bit tool agnostic to the degree that it's not like you need to do a certain task with this particular tool. And some of you have internal tools, like we said, as Copilot or Gemini or some others. Claude is an amazing tool. Claude.ai from Anthropic is really, really capable and gaining a lot in popularity. ChatGPT is a classic. But again, there is Perplexity, which is a tool that is amazing for search and research. When you're looking for public information out there, it's really good to use for that sort of task. And you can say, okay, act as a public affairs researcher and come up with the main EU policy regulatory trends affecting renewable energy sector for the next 6 to 12 months. And then you give more details as to what you want to see, not just a broad kind of casting the net and hoping for a good catch, but to say, well, I want a table and I want trends in the table and relevance and impact and recommended action and all the other goodies. So you are more deliberate as to what you want in the results. And the results could look something like this, with sources, with confidence. And also it's interesting, the confidence level of AI, because it's not only surfacing information that's already out there, it puts an extra layer of analysis on it. So it says, okay, here's why I think it's relevant. Here's why I think the impact is, or what the impact is going to be on the particular sector. And you say, okay, I'm pretty confident, says the AI. Now, whether even high confidence means truth or good judgment is for your judgment, dear human, to see whether you agree with that. But at least the AI is giving some indication as to its confidence level, so you can work with that accordingly. Anything else to add to this, Jacques?
No, 100% clear.
Okay, good. Thanks for the confirmation. You're a good AI. It taps my shoulder, says you're doing good. Whatever I do, it's good. Okay, you want to go ahead with the advocacy gaps?
Sure. So another thing we really like to use AI for, or share this example, is a great tool to review the gaps that you might have in your advocacy, in your communications, and the way public affairs is run. So, for example, here we're using a different tool. This time we're using a tool called Manus. It's a tool that has been developed by Meta, and it's a tool that allows you to basically have an AI scan a website and to see if there's anything wrong, if anything good with how you're presenting yourself. So here, the idea is to analyze the current EU policy debate around grid infrastructure and electrification, and produce 3 insights to identify advocacy gaps. And then we're basically giving specific steps to the AI to run these different tasks, right? So it's sometimes really good to have these steps in mind before you actually write your prompt or your question. So here we're going to map the main policy arguments currently used by EU institutions and many other organizations. We're going to identify which stakeholder concerns are being addressed well and which are underdeveloped. We're going to compare the dominant narratives. We're going to highlight where our advocacy position might be missing evidence, allies, messages, and many other gaps. And then we're providing some ideas on the size of the output, right? So here, through this example, you can see that we're using a specific tool that has a specific mission. We're breaking down the steps. And then we're also highlighting here the goal that we're trying to achieve here is assess our advocacy gaps in a specific number of words. And maybe you want to talk about the results you found for this specific example, Andras?
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think it's pretty neat, and it does these visual components completely by itself. I didn't say give me this whatever this is called in English, this spider web style graph, and it even gives their different tabs, and essentially it can even present it as a web page. Which you might want to publish or not if it's sensitive, but it's clickable and interactive, and that's pretty cool. It's not your static PDF, but something that can have some small animations and some fancy things. But more importantly, the substance, the content of it seems pretty good. Now, of course, if you want to push it a notch further, you will do some background initial research. So not necessarily giving a one-shot prompt and hoping that it's going to do a perfect job. If it's a bit more layered and deeper, then it's going to do it with more depth. But you see, here's the advocacy gap, and here are the different things that it identified, and there's obviously much more to it. But it's a neat way to do comparisons, and especially working with different websites and not just documents or files, but actually live pages and comparisons. Another one is generating campaign ideas. Now, many of you might be involved in advocacy campaigns or public affairs campaigns. And let's say you're an experienced campaign strategist working for a European electricity company. You're preparing for a campaign to persuade EU national policymakers. So I'm not just saying this is what you do, but here's the objective you're trying to achieve, and say you want to persuade the policymakers about this particular issue. And say, well, generate 5 ideas that could help position a company as a constructive, solutions-oriented voice. So again, it's not just positioning the company as such or as a force for good, but to say constructive, solutions-oriented. So we are applying these techniques where we're not just giving not just a generic prompt, but a very targeted and very specific, very deliberate way of what we want to achieve. What is the context? Where are we trying to go? and say, well, give me campaign concept and target audience and core message. Now, again, if I were to do this as a public affairs consultant or as a strategist, if you will, I probably would take it in steps and not give everything in a single go, because then I will get better results. But to say, okay, here are campaign concepts, let's brainstorm, give me 32 ideas, rank them according to their likely impact. And then I will choose 5. Great. And then I say, okay, let's do a target audience mapping. Who would be a receptive audience for this particular issue? Okay, give me 12 ideas, I'll choose 5. So I would do that kind of wide search and then curate the information and cut it back to a reasonable number. And then in the end, I would probably put together those component pieces that I have curated with AI and then run a larger prompt or a larger task. But even with this one, it did a pretty good job. So it says, okay, here are the campaign ideas. Grid bottlenecks and permitting the green roundtable and consumer benefits campaign. Now, I'm not in the sector, so I have less educated judgment as to which one is reasonable and which one looks good. But well, there's the target audience, the core message, the format, and why it works. So it's a pretty neat output as a start that you can then refine later. Jacques, you want to present your nice interface?
So what we usually like to use AI for, and I think if we go back to the other example, it's not just to write text. Sometimes it's a helpful partner to help us visualize what this idea might look like. So if you're thinking about improving your services for some of your clients, maybe it's in the quality of your analysis, but it could also be in visualizing an idea. So maybe you want to use AI to visualize what this campaign idea might look like, visualize what a dashboard might look like for a client, visualize, how these different elements can be presented to a potential client, right? So it's just thinking more beyond the simple use of, I'm going to use AI for writing text, but how can I actually visualize this answer or this result?
And I think someone mentioned Claude in the chat. Yes, I mean, I can say we, but certainly I have become a massive fan of Claude AI. It's really good at creating dashboards and that sort of visuals, which are not graphic design driven, but much more like a web page or interactive interface. And it's really good at creating those. So if you, even for internal processes to say client tracking, or you're almost certainly using some customer relationship management, CRM systems, you can create those which are very specific to your particular organization. Or if you're a small independent consultant and you want to track certain things or create some sort of a dashboard, Claude can do that really well. There are other more purpose-built tools like Lovable or Replit and others, N8N. These tools are mostly for vibe coding, so essentially natural language-based coding, which is not properly speaking coding, but it creates code-based applications. So those are more purpose-built, but you can create those on a very straightforward and relatively easy way. This one is a curated list that we have made available. So I mentioned some of these tools, and there are many others obviously out there that we have played with or tried or found to be helpful. And some are as well known for most people as like Google's Notebook LM, which is really good at working with large documents. But not just that, because you can connect a YouTube video and it picks up the transcription of that video, and you can work with that through this tool. And even slide designers or slide creators like Gamma or Beautiful AI or Granola is a really good note taker. So there are many tools out there that we have put out there as a curated list, along with public affairs tools that we are aware of that do monitoring or AI-powered features. You want to say about the message house?
Absolutely. And messaging is also a very important task for a lot of public affairs consultants. So let's dive into this example. Here, it's a really simple prompt: build a message house for an advocacy campaign on creating a fair and science-based EU front-of-pack nutrition labeling system. And here you're basically defining the constraints that the AI has to go through, or the specific requirements you want for the specific message house. So sometimes it could be very strategic tasks that you're running, but sometimes it's just very, it's all about execution. So here we want main message, 3 supporting arguments, proof points, objections, and responses. And that's what we get. We get everything we wanted. We could have asked for having this information in a different format, but the table is usually a great format to visualize everything. And we have the main messages, the supporting arguments, the proof points, all listed here. And this is usually the first step to allow you to then visualize this message house. So we have another prompt. It's a follow-up prompt where now we want to visualize it. So we're using AI to use the information it created and help us visualize it in a very concise way, so that we can use that potentially in a presentation or in any form of communication with our stakeholders. And this is what we got. So obviously there's some design sort of elements that still need to be corrected. There's a few color choices that could be changed regarding, your look and feel, or the look and feel of your client. So it's really important here that you see AI as a conversation starter, or something that helps you visualize something that is nearly ready. And then it's up to you then to assess what needs some adjustments. You're the experts in the room, so you're more aware of how this is going to be potentially understood or misunderstood. So then it's up to you to correct some of the language here. But at least you can see here the core message being at the roof of the message house, as long as you have also the three specific arguments and the proof points below that.
By the way, I'll just jump in for a second to say, I haven't done this experiment, but it would be interesting to do, is simply taking this image into ChatGPT's, I wouldn't say new version. I mean, it updates by itself, but the image generator has recently been updated a couple of weeks ago, and it's very powerful. So just to throw this in there and say, okay, boost this or turn that into an infographic, or keep it as a message house, but make it more aligned and just simply more visually, aesthetically better. And it likely would do a great job. So likely would create that, and it's pretty capable picking up content and beautifying it, if that's a word. Now this one is my tool, which well, at least the current version of my tool, because it is more than a message testing. It's creating messages which are adapted to an audience. I think I need to find a way to get it moving, which I may not be able to do. Let's see. Well, okay, it's not playing, but anyways, we'll send you the recording. The idea on Rhetora.ai, you can sign up right now. What you have here is you can feed in messages and documents, and you can pick from personas and what we call cohorts, audiences, essentially, who will give you feedback and ideas for improvement, and ideas how to make it more relevant for them. So basically, whether it's a press release, whether it's a social media post, you can choose which audience you're aiming it at, and then you get very specific feedback and recommendations how to make it more personalized and recommended or relevant for those particular audiences. And we're building a new version, which is also going to have messaging opportunities for B2C, so for consumer-facing product, and B2B, so if it's for institutions or organizations, and with options where you can create narratives and you can create the messages which essentially reinforce an overarching narrative, and you can define communicators so it will speak on your voice. So this is our own tool, and this is going to be the new version coming in a few months, where you can also create from scratch, hyper targeted for specific audiences. So a couple of words, Office and Copilot, and looking at, because I would assume many consultants or freelancers and even larger consultancies work in a Microsoft environment. And so we wanted to give a couple examples with Copilot and to say how you can essentially leverage Copilot inside your existing systems. And like in Teams, you can actually, based on the recording or the transcript of a meeting, you can get a lot of deep insights based on what was being said and what actually may not have been said, but it's between the lines. Or using AI, Copilot in this case, in Outlook, to not just surface specific messages, but find relevant items when you are doing, say, a policy research. And so, okay, which emails and which attachments can be brought into a chat conversation so you can pull useful information from it. Or in Word, you can use Copilot plugged into Word for structured thinking, or in Excel to say, help me find insights from this data set inside Excel, or with PowerPoint creating presentation, with the caveat that Copilot doesn't seem to do a great job, at least at the time of recording, to create PowerPoint slides. I mean, it does it, but it's not great yet. I'm pretty sure it's going to improve over time, but at least it's the seed of an idea. And even in Copilot, there's so many other things you can do with automation, or even very simple tasks to say, well, every day I need an email with my upcoming calendar events. It can also do news scanning, and it will not necessarily substitute in the short term the regulatory tracking. But if you want to know what's happening in a sector or an industry, Copilot with some automation can do a pretty good job. As workflows, you can say, even for your own internal work organization, meeting summary or so, but it can also give a news summary that I just mentioned. And also using perhaps Copilot with different tools to say, okay, here's a meeting. Let's take the meeting transcript. Let's use it for another step. Here's from that, create an email in Outlook, and here's a report summary that I want to refine in Word, and then in the end, create a slide deck from it. So essentially having different content pieces and using AI to repurpose it for the kind of audience or tool that you need. Moving to a slightly different area. So researching and preparing high-level meetings. So maybe, Jacques, you want to speak about how to run that, how to do that.
Sure. So it's really good to use AI for preparation of meetings and anything that needs work before something happens. So here it's a simple prompt. I'm preparing a meeting with a specific MEP, and I want to understand his position on a specific topic. So the idea is to use AI to run a quick scan on a person's activity in a specific space, and then 3 key topics to discuss during our meeting. So a lot of things can be done just to collect data online on someone's activity, what somebody said in the news, and then apply this to what you're actually faced with or how you're trying to prepare for a meeting with this person. So you will see in the next slide some examples, or at least some results from this scan. So you will see information about the specific MEP, the specific party, the specific committees, and then 3 key discussion topics that you might want to think about when it comes to meeting this person, right? So here you can be as specific as possible. You can also do follow-up prompts where you're asking specific questions about some of these areas. But the idea is very simply scanning what's being said about a specific topic or a specific person online, and then addressing these points in your meeting. So just to follow up on something that was said also in the chat, Perplexity is also a great tool for doing stakeholder mapping. If you're trying to find specific names, specific people who are responsible for a specific policy space. So that's really good. But I would always encourage you to cross-check your results to make sure that the MEP that you're talking about is actually still current, is still in power. If not, then it's always great to open another conversation and to ask these AI tools to cross-check some of the results you have to make sure that you're getting good results. So you can use AI to collect information, to prepare meetings, but also you can use AI to assess sort of the correctness of your answers and the correctness of the information you've got from these tools.
And I see that there's one question that just came in, which is which AI tools are most effective for stakeholder mapping, for tracking non-obvious or emerging actors when you set up a brand new project, EU level initiative? And I think Perplexity would be top of the list at this point in terms of stakeholder mapping. And a lot depends on your prompt, because sometimes it might come up with fairly obvious, even if your instruction is not obvious, but fairly straightforward stakeholders. And you could say, certainly instructed to say what are the non-obvious stakeholders, but say, here is the perspective that I'm looking at. I'm looking at stakeholders for funding, non-obvious stakeholders from a funding perspective or regulatory compliance perspective. So give it much more details, and then certainly push it to go towards the non-obvious ones. Or to say emerging ones, you could say, well, from the past years, or those that seem unimportant at this point, but they are gaining traction based on media presence or based on some other aspects. Now, another good way preparing for planning for pushback, when you meet that particular member of parliament that Jacques mentioned, you can really aim to get prepared for what the conversation might look like and what are the counter arguments that might be thrown at you. And using Harvard business negotiation techniques is a good idea to use those best practices. So you can say, well, here are the possible pushback arguments that you can expect, so you can prepare for it in advance, right? And in a similar vein, stress testing your position, you want to go into a meeting with good arguments and say, okay, here's the client's position. You can feed that into Copilot or a trusted tool which has the necessary safeguards against the information getting compromised, and say the task is to argue against this position. So once you are very clear what might be pushed back, well, you can make the initial argument far more solid. So describing the most damaging framing an opponent could deploy and what the output should look like, as you see in the last row. Do not hedge, be the opponent, and honest stress test. So it really corroborates the initial information. And then Copilot in Word, a similar one, you can do that straight in the briefing. So if you're putting together a briefing, you can do that straight directly inside Copilot. You don't need to move that into a dedicated chat, but you can use the plugin. And by the way, those of you who have maybe not have, say, corporate firewall or other IT limitations, Claude, the AI tool Claude, can be plugged into Word and PowerPoint. The same thing with ChatGPT. It has a plugin into Word and PowerPoint, and I think also Excel. And I think there's a beta version for Outlook. So just because you're not on the Microsoft ecosystem, these other tools can also work with the Microsoft apps. Debate. Jacques, you want to present this?
Sure. So another thing to think about is to use AI to map some of the blind spots that you might have in a debate or that an organization might have. So here we're also giving it a role. So act as a policy debate analyst specializing in stakeholder mapping. And we then share more information about the specific policy debate. And then the idea is, as we said before, to follow specific steps and to analyze this debate and map what is not being said. So it's always interesting to see what is not being said, what can be misinterpreted, what people can read between the lines. So a lot of things can happen between the cracks, right? So it's understanding, so analyzing this debate, mapping what is not being said. So the people who are absent, the ignored concerns, the political blind spots, the silenced voices, the missing evidence. And that's basically it. So it's allowing you to anticipate any pushbacks or anticipate any gaps that you might have in the way you're presenting information.
And then to the point of the person who put that into the chat box with the question, with the non-obvious stakeholders, but in this case, non-obvious coalition allies, where we would say, okay, you're an expert in EU stakeholder mapping, and that's usually helpful. It changes somewhat the focus of the AI, and it tries to act as that particular expert, and it could be a negotiation expert, and it could be an accountant for all that matters. It does change somewhat the quality of the output if you give a certain role to the AI. You say, well, our advocacy goal is whatever the advocacy goal is, and say map non-obvious potential allies overlapping policy interest, and you can collect those in some shape or form. And you say explain the specific shared interest and what they stand to gain, and then say, okay, who would be good allies? Now, one thing we're definitely doing here is relying on the AI's judgment. And you, as an expert, might fully disagree with that judgment. Now, if you do, say it. Or if you have certain methods or prioritization or some step that you are following, then say that. So it's not like you want to feed in superficial queries or information and then be frustrated that the results are not good. Try to be very explicit, very upfront, the method, the perspective that you yourself are using. And that is going to lead to better results. So let's say in Copilot, you can put that into an Excel sheet and say, okay, here's column A with all the stakeholders. Column B is what they stand for or what their primary interest is. And then you use AI as a helpful method, as a good tool to analyze that complex information. And again, if we're talking maybe 10, that's not so much an added value, but if you really do a major stakeholder mapping with really diverse positions and very detailed descriptions of those, we're talking several dozens and lots of heavy data, AI can definitely be super helpful. So a couple others to cover still is, let's say you're a public affairs expert focusing on AI data center policy and say, okay, what's the impact on our client? Summarize the finding, next steps for the objectives. It does the job as it should, and then even creates you that briefing or that email or that summary. But then you say, okay, this is not very easy to read. Break it down into bullet points, improve the readability. So we're very explicit as to what we're expecting and very explicit how we would like the format to look. And it does it, right? Like it's always about being very deliberate, conscious, upfront, explicit as to our good outcome. Jacques, you want to say what to do when AI answers seem wrong?
Yeah, so the natural question is to challenge it. So explain in detail how you came up with these results and share your main blind spots. So here you're asking for how it came up with the decision or the results, and then specific blind spots that they might have overlooked, right? And then it's up to you as an expert to assess these things, right? So how, you know, the specific content was written, and what are the things that AI is missing in terms of context to provide even better answers down the line.
And so then you see, go ahead.
Yeah, you have the result here in terms of how it came up with the results. And then on the next slide, it's all about maybe some of the things that it overlooked. So maybe it selected themes, or the report is unverified source, or it ignored audience targeting. So regardless of what it overlooked, it's always good that you're in charge of seeing these things so that you can assess if a result is correct or not.
So what you're doing is basically telling the AI that it's confession time and tell me where you would criticize your own work or where you are not so confident as to its veracity or accuracy. Now, summarizing long documents, certainly everyone does that with AI, but we encourage you to try Notebook LM. It's really good. And this is the interface. Those of you who have not played with it yet, where essentially you can upload different sources, not just one, but really large numbers, depending on, it's a free, but if a larger number, then you might need to pay for it. But it's super, super helpful and accurate. It gives you source references, and really the hallucination is almost non-existent among the uploaded document, or you can feed in, like we said, YouTube videos or other different sources. And on the right side, you see you can create mind maps or audio overview, even quiz if that's what you wish. Then these are really nice formats using the NotebookLM format or a mind map of this sort, and then you can open the different toggles and it becomes even the sub points. So it helps with a visual understanding of information, and it generates you infographic. This is a fairly typical design style, so recognizable for those who know how NotebookLM operates, but you can even give some custom instructions and say, okay, do it in pencil drawing style or New Yorker cartoon style or others. Then it's going to be less typical and less recognizable that it was fully AI generated. And other tools, and just for the sake of reference, we'll just mention these without any particular depth, is you can ask for brutal criticism, playing the devil's advocate with the revision of a particular EU or other piece of legislation. You could say, be brutally honest, identify the main flaws and what could be misinterpreted. And this might be helpful for policymakers, but if you are a stakeholder, you're an NGO, you're an industry group, you can definitely use this and tear it apart and say, once done, provide a short list and be brutally honest. Do not hold back. I think that's Jacques' innovation or invention or word choice to say, do not hold back. And it does as instructed. It says main weaknesses, and really puts everything it can in its repertoire of arguments to tear it apart, what to fix, and really does a pretty good job at that. A similar thing saying you're a cautious regulatory lawyer, sharp political strategist, blunt communications director. I like those adjectives, right? Where the different roles, but each has their own, let's say, typical job attitude, or let's say professional attitude, and then see what it gives. So not only to say, take it, examine it from that perspective, but actually criticize it or review it from that particular angle. And this is the consolidated critique, exactly as we had asked. And the aim here is not so much the full accuracy, is to make it sort of inspiring and provoke new ideas and new perspectives that you can do with the text to actually make it more robust. So Jacques, takeaways for you as we're nearing the end of our session.
Yeah, so feel free to ask any last questions in the chat, but basically in terms of takeaways for public affairs consultants, we see really the benefits of using AI by simply providing more context, providing more constraints to these AI systems, having a clear idea of what you want to achieve, and then explaining exactly how you want the AI to process the information. We advise you to also use AI to challenge your results and as well your assumptions. So sometimes you think it's the best way to do something, but AI can be there to help you assess if that's true. Ask deeper questions, provide better questions, and more context in the prompts is always a great idea. Use AI as a thinking partner, not just something or someone to just execute something you want to get done. So use it really to brainstorm ideas and ask follow-up questions. There's another thing here is to also thinking about stating your problem or your goals versus giving instructions. So by stating a problem and by explaining what you're dealing with, AI can also come up with a solution that you've never thought about. So sometimes it's good to start with the problem and the root cause of your issue than giving straight instructions. And then we'll share the link of the tools that you can experiment with, but this is also an invitation for you to try to test, to experiment as much as possible.
So that's pretty much it. And if you're interested in any follow-up or in a workshop for your team, we're very happy to do that. We work with quite a few number of consultancies in Brussels and beyond, helping them use and leverage AI really with all sorts of tools. So like we said, we're kind of tool agnostic. And we definitely focus on the mindset and the practical uses, and not just the what as much as the how you can actually harness the immense power of AI, and then give ideas, answer questions, and we do it with really with a hands-on mindset. So with that, if there's any other question or comment or other that you might want to share or put there, you're welcome to do so, either now or as a follow-up. Like we said, the slides and the recording will be shared with you quite shortly, and we'll put that probably on our website in our newsletter. And if we can be helpful, then we're more than happy to oblige. And thank you so much. It did not seem fully confirmed and clear that we can put all, or we can fit all these slides and the content into 45 minutes. And now we're 1 minute past, but I think we can say we made it. And a big thanks to Sonia, who was extremely helpful and instrumental in the back. And then some words from you, Jacques, before we wrap.
No, really happy to have had this conversation today, and I hope this session was really useful. So we're going to wrap things up right now. If you have any further questions, we're always available on LinkedIn. You can follow us on Substack as well, and we'll share the recording, the slides, and everything else to help you review everything we talked about today. But thank you so much for coming, and let's continue the conversation.
Amazing. Thanks for being here.